Alright, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today we have a deck analysis for you guys talking about the new ADP Zacian. Was once the best deck in the format, is now looking to make a return as one of the best decks in the format since Darkness Ablaze has just come out. Decks like Eternatus Vmax, decks like Centiskorch Vmax, and a few others have really taken front and have gotten a lot of hype recently. So I think that with some new tech inclusions to the decks with new cards that have come out in Darkness Ablaze, I think that ADP Zacian has more than enough in its toolkit to become the new best deck in the format again, or at least one of the best decks in the format. To start it off, we'll talk about the Pokemon. So of course, we're running three Zacian Vs. Old decks probably ran about 4 of these, but now we're running 3. There's a few other attackers that we're adding to this deck since we're having to counter some of these new good decks that are coming into the format. Decks like Centiskorch V, decks like Eternatus V, Vmax at least, and decks also like Decidueye are looking to be pretty pesky when it comes to a lot of these new types of decks that are being front-runned by Pokemon V and Vmax. So we're running 3 Zacian Vs in this deck because we're adding some new attackers to this deck. One of those new attackers obviously is going to be Zamazenta V. Not as hard-hitting of an attacker as Zacian V, only doing 130 damage as opposed to 230 damage, but we're playing Zacian V, or Zamazenta V, mainly for its ability. Dauntless Shield, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon Vmax. Pretty self-explanatory. Pretty much immune to damage from any Pokemon Vmax, which you'll end up seeing a lot more of since Darkness Ablaze has come out. We have decks like Dragapult Vmax, which is still floating around, very good deck. Decks like Eternatus Vmax that have just recently come out, Centiskorch Vmax, Salamence Vmax, and then any other Vmax deck that you can think of. Zamazenta can really help out in that matchup. Being able to put Zamazenta up in your active and going 1, 2, or maybe 3 turns without taking damage can really help your situation, especially setting up or taking that time to set up some of your other attackers like Zacian V. So we're running 1 Zamazenta V. I've seen some deck lists run multiple Zamazenta Vs, but I think just having 1 is enough to kind of buy yourself some time. The attack Assault Tackle 130, discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. Also really good secondary effect on that attack. Decks like Eternatus Vmax, and even Centiskorch Vmax and Salamence are all going to be running special energies that also came out in Darkness Ablaze. Hidden Darkness Energy is most definitely going to be run at least once or twice in the Eternatus Vmax deck. Centiskorch Vmax has the that new special Heat Energy, which gives it more HP. And Salamence Vmax has the powerful colorless energy it might be running, which can boost its damage. So this attack's secondary effect definitely adds some more power to that otherwise somewhat weak attack of 130 damage. We're also running a Mawile GX, which is an old card, but one that really seems to be very useful in the matchup against Eternatus Vmax specifically. And if you look at its ability, Captivating Wink, when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may have your opponent reveal their hand and put all number of basic Pokemon you find there onto their bench. Now, this might not be, at first glance, a really good ability, but if you think about how an Eternatus Vmax deck is running cards like Zigzagoon, Galarian Zigzagoon, and the new Crobat V, those are cards that our effects really proc once they get placed onto your opponent's bench during your opponent's turn. And being able to take a couple Crobats or take a Galarian Zigzagoon from your opponent's hand and put them onto their bench during your turn, you're pretty much getting rid of the abilities of those cards that they would otherwise be activating once your opponent placed them on their bench. So this can be really useful for kind of turning off those Crobats that might help your opponent come your opponent's next turn. And then Wily Bite, its first attack there for a Steel Energy and a colorless, does 10 damage, but it does 30 more damage for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Now, Eternatus Vmax, you know, conveniently can allow your opponent to have 8 Darkness Pokemon on their bench, and this attack quickly turns to doing 240 damage plus 10, which is 250. And on top of that, we're also obviously running Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia tag team. And if you can get that GX attack off early in the game, this attack goes from doing 250 damage to 280 damage for 2 energy. So it can definitely be a really good secondary attacker. And for 1 less colorless energy, or 1 less metal energy than cards like Zacian V or Zamazenta V. So definitely a really good secondary option there, and also only a retreat cost of 1, which can help out a lot. Other cards that we're running for attackers, we're running 1 Duraludon, mainly just because we need something to hit that Decidueye that recently just came out in Darkness Ablaze. That is a card that can really give this deck and a lot of other decks in the format trouble. Obviously, Decidueye is immune to damage, I believe, from V and Vmax Pokemon, and GXs, I believe, too. So Duraludon, Power Beam there at the bottom for 2 Metal Energy, 1 Colorless, does 110 damage, but again, added with the ADP boost from the GX attack, can do 140 damage, which is actually the exact HP amount of Decidueye, so being able to kind of power up your Duraludon on the bench, and then bring it in there, and then get a couple one-hit knockouts on your opponent's Decidueyes can really help, win that matchup, especially since you're taking 2 prizes per knockout instead of 1 with that ADP boost, preferably. So also another really good, just a really good single prize attacker that seems to just work perfectly in terms of countering that matchup. And then, of course, we're running 2 Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia. We're running 2 mainly just so that we have some extra consistency in finding this card in the deck. It's not always going to be the most needed card in some matchups, but when it comes to decks against things like Decidueye, which are single prize attackers, or decks that don't already have Vmaxes powered up and ready at the beginning of the game, having ADP there to give you that extra 30 damage for the rest of the game, as well as taking that extra prize card whenever you get a knockout, could really be the difference in winning games, especially when you're playing a Ditto matchup against another ADP Zacian deck. Pretty much the most, absurdly useful and just broken card in the card game at the moment. So if it can be a little bit tricky to set up sometimes with 1 colorless, 1 water energy, 1 steel energy, but I mean, it's proven to be worth it, and if you can get it rolling at the beginning of the game, it can really make the difference when it comes to just winning against any of the decks that will be in this new format. Other Pokemon that we're running, mainly for support, we're running 1 Dedenne-GX, just to give us a little bit of extra draw support. Sometimes you do not have exactly the amount of cards that you want in your hand. Sometimes you want a supporter or any of your items, but you have energy in your hand. You can discard that hand with the Dedenne change and then draw 6 new cards. And maybe in those 6 new cards, you're drawing cards like Metal Saucer or Turbo Patch, and then you can use those cards to get the energy cards back from your discard pile and to power up your Pokemon. Next, we're running a Crobat V, a little bit harder to knock out than Dedenne-GX, at least. So when this is on your bench, you can feel a little bit more safe than having a Dedenne on your bench. But similar to Dedenne, you get to draw 6 cards, but you don't get to discard your hand with Crobat. You get to draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. But it's nice to have 1 Dedenne, 1 Crobat V, because you can't use 2 Crobat Vs in one turn, at least use their abilities, and you can't do that with Dedenne. But what you can do is play Dedenne and a Crobat in the same turn if you need to, and really go through, 12 cards at the most, which can really be a very useful draw support in a game. We're also running 1 Oranguru. Sometimes when, like I said, you wanted to discard your hand and draw more cards with the Dedenne or the Professor's Research, you have 1 or 2 cards in your hand that you want to keep, right? Cards that you don't want to get rid of. And having an Oranguru on your bench can kind of solve that problem. You can take one card, use its ability here, Primate Wisdom. You can take one card from your hand and then put it on the top of your deck, and then swap the card from the top of your deck with that card into your hand. So let's say that you have a hand that's pretty much useless that you do not want, but you have a Boss's Orders in hand that you want to keep for later in the game. You can Primate Wisdom that Boss's Orders onto a different card on the top of your deck, then discard your hand, and then you'll have that Boss's Orders still in your hand after you do the Dedenne change, or the Professor's Research. So a very good card for saving your cards for later in the game, cards that you don't want to get rid of, especially in this deck because we are relying on discarding our hand and drawing more cards so often. Getting into the item cards, running 2 Cherish Balls. This deck you might have seen in the past or run in the past, kind of a tag call engine with maybe a Guzma and Hala or Mallow and Lana cards, support cards thrown in here to find your ADP Zacian, or your ADP tag team card. Now I think running Cherish Ball is a bit more useful of a card since we're now running the Mawile GX on top of the Dedenne-GX. So we have 4 GX cards in our deck that one is a draw support, one is really a useful tech attacker, and then the other one is an integral part of the deck. So running 2 Cherish Balls can help us find those cards that are obviously going to be very important. Now onto a new inclusion, I think, into this deck, running Crushing Hammers. In this deck we run 3 Crushing Hammers and can really turn the tide of a game. I mean, obviously a coin flip a coin. If heads, discard 1 energy from your opponent's Pokemon, but that 1 energy can really be the difference from keeping those Eternatus Vmaxes at bay, or keeping a Dragapult Vmax at bay, or even keeping another ADP Zacian, or another ADP tag team that you're playing against kind of out of the way for another turn or another 2 turns or whatever it may be. So buying yourself some time while rapidly accelerating the energy onto your Pokemon can really be a deadly matchup. Can be a really, really good tactic when it comes to this new format of decks. Running 2 Energy Spinners, we run, I believe, let me look. So we're running 2 Water Energies in this deck. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to draw into those cards, especially because ADP needs those Water Energies to use its GX attack to its full effect. So we run 2 Energy Spinners, which can effectively be like drawing another Water Energy, but also if you need a Steel Energy, you can get that as well. And of course, if you're going second, you can search for 3 basic energies, which going second in this deck seems to be a bit more of a better decision than going first, since we have those Crushing Hammers we can draw into on the first turn and use to buy ourselves some time early in the game. We can Energy Spinner and find those 3 energies that'll be really useful for setting up ADP. And also even just finding more energies to discard your hand, and then later down the line, later in the game, using those Metal Saucers, using those Turbo Patches to put those energies back onto your bench Pokemon. And then we're running 3 Energy Switches. Energy Switch is a very kind of underappreciated card, I believe, just in general. In this deck, it's very, very useful. So one scenario that always seems to come up for me that I never really realized happened so often was you start your game with your ADP tag team, you get it all set up, you get the Metal Energy, you get the Water Energy onto it, you use your GX attack, but on the other side of the battle, your opponent has a card that is ready to attack. And you don't want to give that 3 prizer up for damage, you don't want to get it knocked out, and you also don't want to go another turn without knocking out that attacking Pokemon in your opponent's active slot. So instead of using using ADP's Ultimate Ray Attack for like 180 and not getting the knockout, what you can do is just switch into your Zacian and then use things like the Metal Saucer, manually attaching a Metal Energy, and then energy switching off of your ADP onto your Zacian, and then just getting that one-hit knockout on your second turn, going second with the Zacian, and then all of a sudden you're up by 3-4 prizes, and it's just the beginning of the game, and your opponent doesn't have any Pokemon with any energy. So that can be a very important turning point in the battle really early on, and something that for me I find happens pretty often. So having that energy switch option is obviously very good. And then of course, say you have your ADP in the active slot and you're using those Metal Saucers to move up Metal Energy onto your Zacians onto your Zamazenta, your Mawile onto your bench, you need to get that energy somehow on your ADP so you can use its GX attack, and that's what Energy Switch is most commonly used for also. Next, of course, we have the 4 Metal Saucers. Accelerating energy in this deck is the name of the game, right? So having 4 Metal Saucers can really, really, be the difference between just manually attaching every turn or getting 2 or 3 energies on in one turn, which can really, really win. It can honestly win you the game after a hard fought battle. Next, we have Quick Ball. We're running 4 of those because the discard synergy in this deck with the Metal Saucers and the Turbo Patches is very important. Plus, our entire deck is basic Pokemon. Now, this was a bit of a problem having all basic Pokemon back when Obstagoon decks were kind of floating around in the format. But now you have things like Boss's Orders, and now I think those Obstagoon decks don't have cards like Counter Gain anymore. So they aren't as, I don't think, relevant or as common in this new format post Darkness Ablaze as they were before. So having all basic Pokemon in your deck isn't that big of a deal at the moment. In fact, it's actually probably preferred because you're able to run so many Quick Balls and find any Pokemon that you'd like. So very important, very, very great card. Maybe one of the best cards to come out in this Sword and Shield era from the base set. Next, 4 switch cards. Kind of self-explanatory. When you're playing Zacian as your main attacker, its attack here, Brave Blade. During your next turn, this Pokemon can attack, which seems like a fair drawback to doing 230 damage for 3 energy. But when you're playing switch cards and when you're also playing cards like Air Balloon, which we are playing, you're able to do this Brave Blade attack with the same Pokemon over and over and over again. Or if you're not able to get the double switch in one turn, you have the energy switch options. So something that can definitely attack, turn after turn after turn. And that is a big reason why we are running switch cards. So we're running 4 of those, very important. And then a new card that came out in Darkness Ablaze is Turbo Patch, which is a bit like Metal Saucer, except it requires a coin flip, and it works for any kind of basic energy, not just metal energy, and not to just metal Pokemon, but to any kind of Pokemon, excluding GXs. But that's fine because we're able to turbo patch some water energies or some more steel energies onto our bench Pokemon, and then use one of those 3 energy switches to move it on to ADP. So it just kind of gives us a little bit more options when it comes to accelerating that energy from our discard pile. It gives us more freedom to discard our hands, discard our cards that might have metal energy, in your hand. So just kind of, we run it to accelerate more energy, to kind of give the deck more of a fast-paced approach, even more so than it already has. So not a terrible card, not an amazing card, I don't think. But when you're running a deck like this, being able to accelerate even more energy from your discard pile can be very useful. So we're running 2 of those as well. We run 1 Chaotic Swell. We don't really have any stadiums out at the moment that would be super useful to this deck. So running a Chaotic Swell kind of just limits your opponent to what they can do, at least. If you don't have a stadium that you can play yourself that will help you, you might as well play a stadium that's going to get rid of your opponent's stadium that might help them. The ultimate counter stadium card. We run 1 of those because, why not? Now on to the supporter cards. We're running 3 Boss's Orders, we're running 3 Marnies, and we're running 3 Professor's Researches. I like running the 3-3-3 line because it just kind of gives it some consistency. Boss's Orders is an incredibly important card, especially in ADP Zacian. Really what you're going to want to be doing for this deck 99% of the time is just setting up with ADP, loading a bunch of energies onto your attackers, and then gusting your opponent onto out of its active Pokemon onto one of its support Pokemon that's most likely on its bench. When you're playing Eternatus, he's most likely your opponent is going to have 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 Crobats on its bench, which all will get one-shotted by the majority of your attackers. So having 3 Boss's Orders is, for the most part, enough to just win you the game straight off gusting and attacking your opponent's bench. So we run 3 of those, and then we run 3 Marnies. Sometimes your opponent obviously will have more cards in their hand than you have, and sometimes even your hand just isn't as good. Ooh, private offer, okay. Sometimes your hand is just not as good as you would like it, but you don't really want to discard those hands, especially if you don't have an Oranguru on your bench to switch out that card that you want to keep, or if you just don't have the means to getting those cards back that you would like to have, any card that you really want to keep for the later half of the game, then you can use Marnie instead of discarding that hand with Professor's Research. And then of course we do run Professor's Research because, like I said before, having all that discard synergy with this deck, it's important to be able to discard those cards consistently, and also just a really incredible card to be able to draw 7 more cards. Like let's say you use your Dedenne and you get rid of a few cards in your hand that you don't need, but next turn you draw into a decent hand that includes the Professor's Research, and then now you've discarded some cards that maybe you can bring back, like some energy cards, and then you have a new hand of cards that you can use, energy switches, metal saucers, switches, item cards, whatever it is, and then you go through and use all those cards in that hand, and then maybe you have nothing left over other than a Professor's Research, and then you can play that turn because you haven't played your supporter yet, and then all of a sudden you're going through 13 cards in your deck in one turn, which can be just a really big advantage sometimes in the whatever matchup that you're playing in. Now onto the tool cards. We're running 2 air balloons. So, like I was saying earlier in the game, Zacian has to switch out in order to attack turn after turn. So, running an air balloon can be really useful in this deck especially. Most cards in your deck have a retreat cost of 2 or less, and I believe every card does except for ADP, which has a 3 retreat cost, which isn't that bad of a thing anyway. So Oranguru has 2, Zacian has 2, Zamazenta has 2, and then things like Crobat has 1, Dedenne has 1, Duraludon also has 2, and then Mawile has 1. So Air Balloon can work on any of your Pokemon to basically give them free retreat. And with Zacian, that's even more important because you don't have to set up 2 Zacians in play. You can really just keep one set up, and then Air Balloon out with that Zacian, and then just switch right back in. So this card has always been very good, very, very useful in any Zacian deck that's ever been made, and probably will continue to be important in any Zacian deck in the future. So we run 2 of those on top of the 4 switch cards. We run 1 Big Charm, mainly for one reason, and that's because of the Eternatus Vmax deck, which with the full bench does 270 damage, which is absolutely ridiculous, but it's not enough to one-shot the ADP tag team card. But what can happen pretty easily for your opponent is to just play that Galarian Zigzagoon, or at least one of those Galarian Zigzagoons, and then to tag ADP for just the 10 damage, and then have a clear path to one-shotting ADP with the Eternatus Vmax. And that will happen a lot more than you think it will. So having the Big Charm to put onto ADP is a very, very, useful tool indeed. You could run multiple Big Charms just to give you more consistency in that respect, but having at least one is important, which brings ADP up to 310 damage, makes Eternatus Vmax have a lot more difficult of a time for knocking out ADP in one turn. For energies, we're running 9 metal energies, which, like I said, is kind of mainly there for the discard synergy. You might have more energies in all these hands during the game than you want, but that's okay, right? Because you're able to discard your hand with some freedom in this deck. And then later down the line, you have the Turbo Patches, the Metal Saucers to get that energy back onto your Pokemon. So I think having a 9 count of the Metal Energy just kind of works well with the discard synergy and the Metal Saucer synergy. We're running 2 Water Energies for consistency reasons. We need it to power up ADP Tag Team, sorry. And running 2 for consistency reasons, but also cards like Mawile can use a colorless energy for its attack. Things like Zamazenta can use a colorless energy for its attack. Duraludon can use a colorless energy for its attack. So having some water energies in your deck isn't that big of a deal, at least not at all, especially when you're trying to set up with ADP. And we run an Aurora energy, mainly because it is both obviously a metal energy and a water energy at the same time, because it's any energy energy type when you play it. But when you play it, you discard a card from your hand, which again plays into that whole aspect of the discard synergy and getting the opportunity to get multiple energies onto your Pokemon in one turn. Quick scenario that I always love doing with these decks is to play Aurora Energy onto one of your cards, discarding from your hand a Metal Energy, and then just Metal Saucering that Metal Energy back onto your Pokemon, and that's just an easy 2 energy 1 turn combo. So we run 1 Aurora Energy because we have, again, plenty of options to discard cards from your hand, but what we don't have are too many options for having having opportunities where the water energies are entirely relevant. So having 1 Aurora Energy kind of gives you more flexibility in terms of your energy placement. But yeah, that's going to be it, I guess, guys. So comment below what you think of the new deck analysis. I've seen some people running like a water type tech attacker, like a Milotic V, mainly for Centiskorch, because I believe with Centiskorch's retreat cost, and Milotic's first attack, only needing 1 water energy, can be thrown into this deck pretty easily and used very efficiently in even one-shotting a Centiskorch Vmax, especially with your deck being almost entirely weak to fire. Having a water tech attacker like that, like Milotic in this deck, can really be useful. I don't really see Centiskorch becoming too popular of an opponent in this new format, especially with some other decks that are getting a lot more hype. And then also, I don't actually find it that difficult of a matchup even without Milotic V. I know Centiskorch isn't an entirely fast attacker. I know you have Welder, but to do some really serious damage with Centiskorch V, you need, I think, like 4 energies onto it, and Zacian does one-shot it. So I don't really see the need to be running the Milotic V, but I know some people run it, and it might be a good idea. But that's yet to be seen. I know POG 2020 is right around the corner. I know a lot of people are hyping up Eternatus Vmax to be a front runner for that tournament and for the future. But I think right now, at least on the online trading card game here, this application, not many people have been able to obtain all the cards they need to build the Eternatus Vmax deck. So I don't think it's going to be that popular of a deck come POG 2020. At least not as popular as it probably will be in the future. So I do think decks like Eternatus will show up. Decks like Decidueye will definitely show up. And decks that are like this, like ADP Zacian decks, are definitely going to be very, very popular in the format. So I think running a deck that's kind of ready for each kind of matchup that will inevitably come its way is probably the way to go going into these new tournaments in the future. But yeah, that's going to be it today, guys. So let me know what you guys think. Comment below what you guys would add to the deck, some things that you would take out to the deck, and then also let me know what decks you're going to be running for the upcoming tournaments in the future. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.